The first time my mother-in-law laughed at my coat, I was standing in her hallway with a pie I had made from scratch, and snow melting into the cracks of my boots. The last time she laughed at me, I was stepping out of a new car on Christmas Eve, and not a single person in that house could meet my eyes. Let me take you back. If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe, but only if it feels true to something you have lived. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 24 and working the front desk at a small physical therapy clinic in Wilmington, North Carolina. I made $16 an hour. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment over a laundromat that rattled every night from 7 until almost midnight. The place smelled like detergent, old pipes, and fried food from the diner next door. But it was mine. The rent was low. The water was unreliable. The heater had moods. Still, it was mine. Daniel came in on a rainy Tuesday with his wrist wrapped from a tennis injury and apologized 3 times for dripping on the floor. That was the first thing I liked about him. He was careful with other people's inconvenience. He had warm brown eyes, a quiet voice, and the kind of face that looked honest even before you knew whether it was. He worked in logistics for his uncle's distribution company then. Not glamorous, not rich in the flashy way. His family liked to perform, but stable. He asked me out 2 weeks later by pretending he needed help, understanding the insurance form, and then admitting, halfway through, that he understood it perfectly and had only wanted a reason to keep talking. It was corny. I said yes anyway. Our first dates were cheap and wonderful. Shrimp tacos from a place with plastic chairs. A walk by the river. Coffee in paper cups. Late-night conversations in parking lots because neither of us wanted the night to end, but both of us were trying to act like adults who had work in the morning. He told me early that his family had money. Not old money mansion on a hill money. Newer, louder money. The kind that arrived fast enough to stay insecure. His father owned 2 car dealerships with his brother. His mother had never worked outside the home after Daniel turned 12. But she talked as if she had personally built every inch of their life with discipline and superior taste. His younger sister, Alyssa, posted curated pictures of brunches, handbags, and gratitude quotes while living off a trust fund that nobody in the family openly acknowledged. Daniel said all of this with embarrassment. Not pride. That mattered to me. I grew up in a different kind of house. My father drove a city bus for 29 years. My mother cleaned dental offices at night and fell asleep at our kitchen table more than once with her hand still wrapped around a coffee mug she had not finished. Nothing in my childhood was easy, but almost everything in it was honest. When we had chicken, my mother would stretch it into soup the next day. When the electricity bill came high in August, my father would joke that maybe the heat would build character. When I got my first paycheck at 16, my mother cried in the parking lot because she said it meant I would never be helpless. That was the family I came from. The kind that taught survival before style. Daniel met them after 3 months. My mother served baked ziti on plates that did not match. My father offered him iced tea in a jelly jar because we were out of clean glasses. Daniel stayed 4 hours. When we got into his car later, he said, "Your family actually talks to each other." I remember laughing. "Is that unusual?" "For me," he said, "very." I should have listened harder to that answer. The first time I met his family was Thanksgiving. Alyssa opened the door, looked me up and down, and smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. Oh, she said. You're prettier than Daniel described. That is the kind of sentence that sounds like praise if you are not paying attention. I was paying attention. His mother, Patricia, kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "We're very casual here. You didn't have to dress up." I was wearing a plain burgundy sweater, black slacks, and the only ankle boots I owned. Everyone else was dressed almost exactly the same. His father, Richard, shook my hand like he was interviewing me for a position I had already failed to get. At dinner, Patricia asked where I had gone to college. I told her I had done 2 years at community college while working, and then stopped when my mother got sick. She nodded slowly, lips pursed. "Life happens," she said, "though education really does shape options." I said, "It does." And that should have been the end of it. Instead, she smiled and added, "Of course. Some people are naturally more suited to practical work." Alyssa laughed into her wine. Daniel set his fork down. "Mom." Patricia lifted a hand. I didn't mean anything by it. That sentence became the wallpaper of their cruelty. I didn't mean anything by it. After that, every holiday had a pattern. Not open warfare. Something more efficient. Polite humiliation. Christmas. Easter. Birthdays. 4th of July cookouts. Sunday dinners for no reason other than Patricia felt family had been neglecting tradition. At first, the insults were small. My shoes looked surprisingly professional. My casserole was so rustic. My gift wrapping was earnest. One year, Patricia handed me a silk scarf in front of everyone and said, "A little something to elevate your winter wardrobe." Another year, Alyssa asked if my apartment building felt safe at night, with so many random people around. Richard once asked, while carving ham, whether my father had considered retiring before city driving becomes dangerous at his age. The room went quiet after that. Not because they were ashamed, because they were waiting to see how I would react. That is what people like that enjoy. Not the cruelty itself. The flinch. I learned to deny them that whenever I could. Daniel would apologize on the drive home. Every time, he would grip the steering wheel, stare through the windshield, and say some version of, "They're impossible. I'm sorry." And every time I would say, "Then say something there, not here," he would go quiet. Once, the week after Christmas, I pushed harder. We were in my apartment kitchen. The radiator was knocking. A pot of tomato soup was bubbling on the stove. I said, "Do you know what makes it worse?" He looked tired before I even finished. "What?" "That they know you won't really stop them." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I do say things." "Not enough." He leaned back against the counter. "They've always been like this." I remember the silence that followed. It was not dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just the stillness of hearing the person you love explain your pain as if it were weather. As if cruelty was not a choice. As if history made helplessness respectable. I said, "That may be true, but I haven't always been here." He looked at me then. Really looked. And to his credit, he did better for a while. The next Easter, When Patricia commented on my store-brand pie crust, Daniel said, clearly, "Mom, enough." When Alyssa asked whether I had considered more feminine work than clinic administration, he told her to shut up. It helped. A little. But families like his do not stop because they suddenly grow consciences. They stop when there is a cost. And Daniel never made the cost high enough. We got married in late October, under a canopy of copper leaves in a public garden because that was what we could afford. My parents paid for the flowers. Daniel and I paid for everything else ourselves. Except for the rehearsal dinner, which Patricia insisted on hosting, and then spent the whole evening telling people she was just so relieved Daniel had finally settled down. Settled down. Like I was a compromise with decent manners. Alyssa wore cream. Not white, but close enough to be a message. I saw it. So did my mother. My mother leaned over during the toast and whispered, "That girl was not hugged enough, or maybe too much. Hard to tell." I almost laughed into my champagne. That saved me. Sometimes survival is just finding the one person in the room who still knows how to make ugliness look small. After the wedding, Daniel and I moved into a tiny duplex with warped hardwood floors and a backyard barely large enough for 2 folding chairs and a citronella candle. I loved it. The kitchen cabinets shut crooked. The bathroom mirror had black around the edges. The bedroom window stuck every summer. But in the evenings, the light through the back door turned honey-colored and warm. And for a while, I believed that building a private life together would make his family matter less. That was my mistake. People say marriage means you marry a family too. I never believed that. Then I lived it. Daniel's uncle offered him a more senior role at the company about 6 months after the wedding. Better salary, better title, better future. At least on paper. The catch was that the family would suddenly be even more in our business than before. I asked him if he really wanted it. He said yes. I asked why. He said, "Because I'm tired of them acting like I'm the least serious person in the room." I understood that. More than I wanted to. So he took the job. And for the first year, it looked like the right decision. We were careful with money. I kept working. He was putting in long hours but earning more. We paid off my old medical debt from when I had gone to urgent care without insurance 3 times in one winter. We replaced the dying water heater. We bought a used couch that did not sink in the middle. Adult luxuries. Quiet ones. Then the company started struggling. Nothing catastrophic at first. Late shipments. A client dispute. Inventory problems Daniel swore were fixable. But stress changed him in ways I did not recognize fast enough. He became distracted. Then sharp. Then defensive. He started coming home smelling like stale coffee and panic. He would stand in our kitchen, staring at unopened mail, like it was a personal threat. At night, I could feel him awake beside me, even in the dark. The mattress would shift every time he rolled over. One night around 2 in the morning, I asked, "Do you want to tell me what's really going on?" He said, "I'm handling it." And that was when I knew he wasn't. A month later, he came home and sat down at our table without taking off his coat. The heat had gone out that day, and the house smelled faintly metallic from the little space heater I had dragged into the living room. He looked gray. Not pale. Used up. "What happened?" I asked. He swallowed. "Uncle Mark is restructuring." That word, restructuring, One of those words meant to sound strategic, so no one has to say collapse. I sat across from him. Daniel. He rubbed both hands over his face. They're eliminating my position. I waited. Because wives learn this. Bad news often arrives in layers. He looked at the table. I got 8 weeks severance. I let that land. Then asked the question underneath it. What aren't you saying? His mouth tightened. I signed personally on part of an expansion loan last year. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? Personally? I mean, if the company defaults, they can come after me for a portion. For how much? He did not answer right away. My body went cold before he spoke. 42,000. I stared at him. The little heater hummed in the corner. A car passed outside. Tires hissing through rain. You signed that without telling me? I thought it was temporary. That's not an answer. I didn't want to scare you. I laughed then. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes the body does not know what else to do with betrayal when it is wearing your husband's face. You didn't want to scare me. I repeated. So instead you lied. He looked up. Hurt. As if I had made the sentence unfair by saying it plainly. I was trying to fix it before it became real. It was real when you signed it. He stood. Suddenly, restless. I know that. Do you? My voice was shaking now. Because we could have made decisions. We could have cut back harder. We could have prepared. But you decided I didn't deserve the truth unless it was already too late. He went quiet. And there it was again. That old pattern. Not just his family humiliating me. Daniel protecting himself by withholding reality until reality had teeth. He lost the job 3 weeks later. Publicly, it was framed as a strategic transition. Privately, it was humiliation. He was out. His uncle stopped returning calls after the first week. Patricia insisted the whole thing was more complicated than Daniel understands, which was an elegant way of blaming him while pretending not to. Alyssa posted a photo from Aspen with the caption, "Fresh air solves everything." I know because someone sent it to me. That was the winter. Everything cracked. Daniel picked up contract work where he could. I took extra shifts at the clinic and started helping with billing at night for a friend who ran a dental office. We sold my grandmother's little gold bracelet, which I had sworn I never would. We canceled streaming services. We stopped buying meat except when it was heavily discounted. I learned which grocery stores marked down produce after 8. I learned how to stretch one rotisserie chicken into 3 dinners and a pot of soup. I learned how to smile at collection notices before filing them into a folder labeled Handle Friday. We did not tell his family how bad it was. Not because I was proud. Because I understood instinctively that they would not see vulnerability. They would see entertainment. Still, they found out enough. Families like that always do. At Easter, Patricia looked at my dress and said, "You've become very simple lately." I said, "Inflation helps with that." Richard laughed. Patricia did not. During dinner, Alyssa asked Daniel whether he was taking time to rethink his direction. She said it while cutting lamb into tiny, precise pieces. I knew what she meant. Not direction. Failure. He said, "I'm working." She smiled. "Yes, but I mean career-wise." I watched his shoulders harden. Before he could answer, Patricia said, "Sometimes a setback can be useful. It forces humility." I put my fork down. The plate in front of me held scalloped potatoes I suddenly could not look at. "Humility for whom?" I asked. The whole table shifted. Patricia blinked at me. "For anyone who needs perspective." I smiled then. A cold, careful smile. That's a beautiful sentiment from a woman who has never once missed a mortgage payment. Daniel touched my knee under the table. A warning. Not support. Patricia's face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to see the insult had landed somewhere she considered private property. Richard cleared his throat. Alyssa looked delighted. Patricia dabbed at her mouth with a linen napkin. "Well?" she said softly. "We all come from different levels of refinement." There it was. The sentence stripped clean. No more silk around the blade. I looked at Daniel. He was looking at his plate. And something in me went still. Not broken. Still. That is different. Broken begs to be repaired. Still starts taking inventory. On the drive home, he said, "You didn't help?" I turned and looked at him. Streetlights moved over his face in intervals of gold and shadow. "I didn't help. You know how they are?" "Yes." I said, "That's the problem." He exhaled hard. "You made it worse." "No, I made it visible." We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we got home, I stood in our kitchen while he took off his coat and asked the question I had been avoiding for months. "Daniel, do you even like who you become around them?" He froze. Then slowly turned. "That's not fair. Neither is asking me to bleed politely." He sat down heavily at the table. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, "I don't know how to stop this." That was the first honest thing he had said in weeks. And because it was honest, I softened. Just a little. I sat across from him. The kitchen light buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. I said, "Then I do." He looked up. I could see it in his face. Fear. Hope. Embarrassment. All tangled together. We stopped giving them front row seats to our life. I said. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they don't get details. They don't get access. They don't get to inspect us. Get all dose. And then call it concern." He rubbed his jaw. "They're my family." "And I'm your wife?" The sentence sat between us. Simple. Heavy. True. For a while, he tried. He stopped answering every call. He stopped volunteering financial details. He turned down a beach weekend Patricia planned because, as she told him over speakerphone while I stood at the sink rinsing spinach, "It might not be your season to spend freely." That was her phrase. Your season. As if hardship was not already humiliating enough without being narrated by a woman who coordinated insults with table linens. To my surprise, Daniel said, "Then maybe don't plan things that require an audience." He hung up before she could answer. I looked at him from the sink. He gave me a tired half smile. Progress. Small, late, but real. That summer, I got promoted to office manager. It came with more work, more responsibility, and a salary increase big enough to matter but not big enough to rescue us. Still, it was something. I built systems, cut waste, negotiated better vendor rates, trained 2 new hires. I discovered I was good at seeing where money leaked and where people lied about why. That mattered more than I understood then. Because once you learn to read disorder in a business, you start reading it in a family too. Where the performance is, where the fragility is, where the numbers do not match the story. Around September, a patient's daughter named Teresa came in almost every Thursday to help her father with appointments. She owned 3 car washes with her brother and talked faster than anyone I had ever met. One afternoon, she found me reworking a payment schedule after one of our software systems crashed. She leaned on the front desk and said, "You are way too good at this place to stay underpaid." I laughed. "That's sweet, but not especially actionable." She grinned. "My brother is looking for someone to organize operations at our newest location. Scheduling, vendor management, hiring paperwork, customer issue systems. You'd kill it." "I've never worked in that industry." "Who cares? Systems are systems." I almost dismissed it. Not because I thought I couldn't do it. Because poor people get trained to mistrust upward movement unless it arrives with paperwork, signature, and 3 independent witnesses. Still, I took the meeting, then another, then a trial consulting arrangement on weekends. By November, they offered me a full-time role with benefits, performance bonuses, and enough room to grow that I felt something inside me wake up. I did not tell Daniel's family. Not a word. I barely told anyone. Just my parents. And Daniel? My mother cried. My father said, "Good. Let them pay you what your brain costs." Daniel hugged me in the kitchen and laughed into my hair. For the first time in months, it felt like the future had opened a window. The work was hard. Harder than anything I had done before. There were supply issues, staffing issues, equipment issues, people issues. The fluorescent lights at the main office were cruel by 7 in the morning. The coffee was terrible. My phone never stopped vibrating. But I was good at it. Not pretend good. Not praised because they like you good. Useful good. Measurable good. By mid-December, the owners gave me a year-end bonus far beyond what I expected, because one of the locations had turned around faster than projected. I read the number twice in my car before driving home. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Not because it made us rich. It did not. But because it changed the texture of our fear. Suddenly the bills looked finite. Suddenly the folder labeled Handle Friday looked beatable. Suddenly I could imagine buying something not because it was cheapest, but because it would last. That same week, our old car started making a sound, like a drawer full of silverware being kicked downstairs. The mechanic called with an estimate that made absolutely no sense to pay. I sat in the waiting room smelling burnt coffee and rubber and thought, maybe this is how change arrives. Not with violins. With receipts? Teresa's brother knew someone at one of the dealerships outside town. Not Daniel's father's. Another one. We spent 2 careful evenings running numbers at our kitchen table. Heat vent ticking. Pen scratching. Take-out cartons from one indulgent dinner because Hope had made us reckless enough for sesame chicken. When we finished, I looked at Daniel and said, "I think we can do this without being stupid." He smiled in a way I had not seen in a long time. Not defensive, not exhausted, just proud. We bought a dark blue sedan with low mileage, clean lines, and that impossible smell new-to-you cars have. Somewhere between plastic, cold air, and fresh beginning. I cried when I sat in the driver's seat. Not because it was luxurious, because it was earned. The first place I drove was my parents' house. My father walked around the car twice like it was a spaceship. My mother ran her hand over the hood and said, "Look at you." Not look at the car. Look at you. There is a difference. That night, Daniel and I stood in our duplex driveway under a sky sharp with winter stars. And he said, very quietly, "I'm proud of you." I leaned against the car. My breath fogged between us. "I needed you to say that." He nodded. "I know." Then his phone buzzed. He looked down and almost laughed. "What?" He held up the screen. Family group thread. Patricia. Final head count for Christmas Eve. And please, let's keep gifts tasteful this year. Presents over presents. I stared at the phone, then at him, and somewhere deep in me, something old and tired sat up straight. Because I knew exactly what that meant. Not a general principle. Un message. A preemptive one. A way to frame us before we even arrived. As if she could smell change and wanted to lower the ceiling before we walked in beneath it. I smiled. Slowly. Daniel saw the smile and actually stepped back a little. "What?" I took the phone gently from his hand. "Read the message again." And gave it back. Then I looked at the blue car sitting under the porch light. And for the first time in years, I did not feel nervous about Christmas. I felt ready. Type "worth it" if you know what it costs to rebuild your life quietly. And tell me where you're watching from. Because I have a feeling this story is going to hit home in more places than one. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the cold had sharpened into that clean December bite that makes the air feel glassy. I spent the afternoon wrapping gifts on the floor beside our couch with a roll of paper so plain, Patricia would have called it minimalist if it had been expensive and depressing, because it came from me. Daniel paced once in the kitchen, then twice. "You don't have to go," he said. I taped a corner down. "Yes. They do." "No, I mean it. We can stay home." I looked up. "You want to stay home?" He hesitated. That was enough. "No," I said. "We're going." He sat on the edge of the couch. I could feel his nerves filling the room. "I just don't want tonight to become a thing." I folded the ribbon flat against the box in my lap. It became a thing years ago. Outside. Headlights from a passing car slid across our wall. Inside. The tree lights blinked softly in the corner. Blue and gold against the dark. I stood, smoothing my sweater, and picked up the keys to the new car. For a second, I just looked at them in my hand. Metal. Wait. Proof. Then I turned to Daniel. "Let them see us arrive." The drive to Patricia's house took 23 minutes. I remember because I watched every single one of them pass on the dashboard clock. Not out of dread. Out of focus. There are nights when you understand that something invisible is about to become visible, and your whole body goes quiet to make room for it. Daniel Drove. I let him. Partly because he was tense. Partly because I wanted to arrive looking exactly the way I felt. Composed. The heater hummed softly. Streetlights slid over the windshield in long gold streaks. Christmas stations on the radio kept interrupting heartbreak songs with jewelry ads and cheerful voices talking about holiday magic. I turned the volume down after the third commercial. Neither of us said much. At a red light, Daniel glanced at me. "You look calm." "I am calm." He gave a small, nervous laugh. "That's what worries me." I looked out the window. Storefronts were glowing. Window displays full of fake snow and silver ribbon. Families in thick coats carrying boxes and garment bags. Everywhere we passed, there was the same performance. Warmth, tradition, celebration. And under it, if you knew where to look, pressure. Who brought what? Who looked successful? Who looked tired? Who was winning the year? That was all Patricia's Christmas Eve had ever really been. Not a gathering. A scoreboard. By the time we turned onto her street, the neighborhood was lit like a magazine spread. Wreaths on every door. Lanterns by stone walkways. The kind of houses with 3 garage bays and windows so clean they reflected the trees like still water. Daniel slowed as we approached the driveway. There were already 4 cars there. Richard's black SUV. Alyssa's white luxury crossover. Uncle Mark's silver sedan. And Patricia's pearl-colored Mercedes sitting exactly where it always sat. Angled just enough to be noticed. Daniel put the car in park but kept both hands on the wheel. "You sure?" I looked at the front door. Warm yellow light behind beveled glass. Silhouettes moving inside. Laughter. Silverware. A dog barking somewhere in the house. "Yes," I said. Then I opened the door. Cold air hit first. Sharp and clean. Then the small, perfect sound of my boots touching their driveway. I stood and closed the door with a quiet, solid click. And that was when the front curtain moved. Just slightly. Someone inside had seen the car. Good. I walked up the path with my shoulders back and my gift bag in one hand. Daniel came beside me, adjusting his coat. He was breathing too shallowly. I could hear it. When Patricia opened the door, her smile appeared on schedule. Wide. Polished. Artificial enough to have edges. Then her eyes moved past me. To the driveway. And for a second, just 1 second, something real showed on her face. Confusion first. Then calculation. Then a brightness that looked almost painful. "There you are," she said. Stepping aside, we were beginning to think traffic had won. "It almost did," Daniel said. I handed her the bag. "Merry Christmas." She accepted it. Fingertips careful on the handles. "Oh, you shouldn't have." That line again. A ritual. A shield. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon. Expensive candles. Roasted meat. And a kind of staged abundance I had come to recognize before I even named it. Everything glowed. Garland on the staircase. Crystal bowls filled with ornaments no one was allowed to touch. A tree so professionally decorated, it barely looked personal. Alyssa appeared in the entryway wearing a cream-knit dress and the expression of a woman who believed every room improved the moment she entered it. Then she saw me. Then the coat. Then, very briefly, the driveway behind me. The smile on her face paused. Not vanished. Paused. "Wow," she said. "You look festive." I smiled. "So do you." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Uncle Mark came around the corner from the dining room with a drink in his hand. Richard followed behind him. Both men greeted Daniel first. That was standard. Then Richard looked at me, nodded once, and said, "Good to see you." But his gaze drifted too, toward the front windows, toward the car. I noticed. So did Patricia. You can always tell when people are trying to act like they have not noticed the exact thing they cannot stop thinking about. Alyssa tilted her head. "Did you two rent something?" There it was. Not congratulations. Not curiosity. Attest. Daniel opened his mouth. But I answered first. "No." Just that. No elaboration. No apology. No invitation. Alyssa let out a tiny laugh, as if the conversation had not mattered. But it had. Patricia touched my arm lightly. Her rings were cold. "Come in. Come in. We're just about to sit for appetizers." The first hour went the way those nights always went. Cheese boards. Small talk. Tiny evaluations dressed as interest. Richard asking Daniel whether he had seen movement in the market. Uncle Mark speaking in vague, self-important language about expansion and timing, and how only the disciplined survive volatility. I watched Daniel listen with that old tension in his jaw. Part resentment. Part longing. He still wanted something from them then. Respect. Regret. Some late-arriving recognition that he had been more than a convenient son to compare. That was his wound. Mine was different. I had stopped wanting their approval. What I wanted was distance with witnesses. I stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling water, while Patricia unwrapped the gift bag I had brought. Inside was a set of linen napkins from a local artisan shop. Not flashy. Beautiful. Practical. Patricia ran the fabric between two fingers and smiled. How lovely! So understated. Alyssa took one, looked at the hand-stitched edge, and said, "Very farmhouse chic." I smiled at her. You always know how to phrase things. That made Uncle Mark laugh into his drink. Richard looked down. Daniel stared at the mantel. Patricia set the napkins aside with a smile too bright to trust. Then she said, lightly, "I'm so glad things must be stabilizing for you two." The room shifted. Subtle, but real. Alyssa turned. Richard looked up. Uncle Mark sipped and pretended not to listen while obviously listening. That was how Patricia did it. Not direct attack. Open a space. Let everyone lean toward it. I said, "They are." She nodded. Well, that's a blessing. These seasons can be so humbling. The same word. Again. Humbling. As if hardship was a moral corrective, she was delighted to assign to other people. I took a slow sip of water, then set the glass down on the marble side table. Yes, I said, though sometimes what's humbling is realizing who enjoys watching it. No one moved. Not immediately. Patricia's smile stayed in place, but her eyes hardened. "Oh my," Alyssa said with a tiny laugh. "Are we doing this already?" I turned to her. "No, I'm just speaking clearly. It only feels dramatic because everyone here is used to saying cruel things in soft voices." That landed. Richard looked straight at me for the first time all evening. Uncle Mark cleared his throat. Daniel stepped closer to my side, not touching me, but near enough that I felt the choice. Patricia's face smoothed over again. "I think you may be misreading concern." "I think concern sounds different," I said. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the faint clink of ice settling in someone's glass. Then Patricia gave a brittle little laugh and turned toward the dining room. "Well, dinner is ready." That was the first shift. The old rhythm had broken. Not loudly, but unmistakably. At the table, I ended up across from Alyssa. Daniel sat to my right. Patricia at the head. Richard at the other end. Candles down the center. Polished silver. A roast in the middle with rosemary branches arranged so carefully they looked instructed. For the first few minutes, conversation stayed safe. Travel. Weather. A neighbor's remodel. Someone's son applying to business school. Then Uncle Mark looked at Daniel and said, "So, what's next for you?" Simple question. Loaded room. Daniel reached for his water. Still consulting, looking at a couple options. Mark nodded slowly. Good, good. Then, after the exact right pause, it can be difficult to regain footing after a public setback. I felt Daniel go still beside me. Patricia lowered her eyes to her plate as if she had nothing to do with any of it. Alyssa cut her food and said, "Honestly, I think resilience is more important than image." That line almost made me laugh, because nobody in that family cared more about image than the woman saying resilience like it was yoga advice. Daniel inhaled to answer, but this time I touched his wrist under the table. Not to silence him, to stop him from wasting himself. Then I looked at Uncle Mark. "It's interesting hearing you talk about public setbacks." The fork in his hand stopped. Mark looked up. "What do you mean?" I held his gaze. "Nothing complicated. Just that some people survive them better when they're not built on borrowed appearances." Patricia set her fork down. Alyssa's eyes flicked between us. Richard looked annoyed now. Not at me. At disruption. Men like him often do not hate cruelty enough to stop it. But they hate mess because it inconveniences dinner. Mark leaned back in his chair. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything." I smiled. "I'm saying exactly what I mean." Daniel looked at me. There was surprise in his face. And something else? Relief. Because once someone tells the truth in a room like that, everyone else gets to stop pretending they cannot smell it. Patricia dabbed her lips. "This is Christmas Eve." "Yes," I said, "and somehow that has never stopped any of you before." The silence after that was different. Heavier. Richard finally spoke. That's enough. I turned to him. No, enough would have been years ago. Nobody interrupted. Not because they agreed, because they were stunned. And I realized then something I wish I had understood much earlier. People who build their power on your politeness are usually helpless once you stop donating it. Patricia's voice went cool. If you have a grievance, perhaps this is not the time. I looked around the table. The crystal glasses, the folded linen, the candles. The expensive little rituals of people who believe beauty can excuse behavior. It's exactly the time, I said. Daniel's hand moved to his napkin. I could tell he was nervous, but he was not stopping me. That mattered. I took a breath. Steady. Measured. Then I said the thing I had been carrying for years. You have all treated me like I was temporary, embarrassing, educational. Maybe the poor girl Daniel picked before he knew better. Patricia opened her mouth. I lifted one hand slightly. Not aggressive. Just clear. No, I'm talking now. Her mouth closed. So I continued. You commented on my clothes? Midjob, my apartment, my parents, the food I brought, the gifts I gave, the way I spoke, the way I worked. You turned every holiday into a test and called it family. Alyssa looked flushed now. Mark stared at his plate. Richard's jaw tightened. Daniel sat very still. I looked at Patricia. You especially. You have spent years saying cruel things and hiding behind manners. But manners are not kindness. They are just polish. No one breathed. Or maybe they did. Maybe I just stopped hearing it. You wanted me to feel small, I said, and for a long time. I did. Not because you were right, because being judged over and over again wears grooves in a person. That was the gravity of it. Not one insult. Accumulation. 1,000 tiny cuts, asking whether you belong until even joy becomes defensive. I glanced at Daniel then. And the hardest part wasn't even you. My voice dropped. It was what your son did by making me survive it alone. Daniel flinched. The truth had reached him too. Good. He swallowed. Claire? I shook my head once. No. You need to hear it as clearly as I lived it. Patricia looked between us with open disbelief, as if the real crime here was honesty arriving without a napkin under it. I turned back to the table. When Daniel lost his job, I didn't judge him. When we were scared, I didn't shame him. When we sold pieces of our life to keep breathing, I didn't make his fear into entertainment. I stood beside him. My throat tightened then, but I kept going. And all of you watched, some of you from up close, some of you from vacation photos and indirect comments and little phrases designed to remind us where you thought we belonged. Alyssa's face went red. That's not fair. I looked at her. No? Then tell me what, did you rent something? Was supposed to mean tonight? She blinked. Actually blinked. Because people like her are often shocked to discover their words sound uglier when quoted back in daylight. I was just asking. No, you were placing us. That shut her up. I looked at Mark. And you? He stiffened. You built Daniel up when it benefited you. Let him sign what he should never have signed. And disappeared. The second, the risk became expensive. His face darkened. That is not what happened. I nodded. Maybe not in the version you tell at golf? Richard pushed his chair back slightly. The sound scraped hard against the floor. Enough, he said again. This time Daniel spoke before I could. No. Everyone turned. He had not raised his voice, but it was the strongest I had ever heard him sound in that house. No, he repeated. She's right. The room changed. Completely. Because the one thing that family had always relied on was Daniel's hesitation. And it was gone. He put both hands flat on the table. I should have protected her years ago. Patricia stared at him. Daniel, I should have protected my marriage years ago. Don't be dramatic. He let out a single humorless laugh. That's rich. Richard said his name like a warning. He ignored it. You all made her pay for not coming from money, and I let you. I looked at him then. Really looked. There was grief in his face. Shame. And finally, ownership. He looked at his mother. You've treated concern like a costume. You say vicious things and then act offended when people hear them correctly. Patricia went pale. Not embarrassed. Threatened. Because Image was finally losing control of the room. Mark leaned back, shaking his head. You're both being ridiculous. Daniel turned to him. Am I? His voice stayed calm. You had me sign personal exposure on that expansion without ever giving me full numbers. Mark scoffed. That is absolutely false. Daniel's eyes did not leave his. No. What's false is the story you told afterward. I did not know, until that moment, that Daniel had brought documents. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a thin folded packet on the table. Not theatrical, but easy. He slid it toward Richard first. Then Mark. Then let it rest there between the candles and the cranberry dish, like a final piece nobody had expected to see. I asked for copies months ago. Daniel said, I got them. Mark did not touch the papers. Richard did. His eyes moved over the first page, then the second, then back to Mark. And in Richard's face, I saw something I had never once seen directed at his brother. Doubt. Small. Sharp. Enough. Mark's voice hardened. This is not the place. No, I said quietly. You all seem to love that phrase when truth shows up. Patricia looked at me like she finally understood something she should have understood years earlier. That I was not arriving to be measured anymore. I was arriving finished. Alyssa folded her arms. Oh my God. So this is why you came in tonight acting superior. I almost smiled. Superior? She gave a bitter laugh. You show up in a new car and suddenly want revenge? There it was. The car. Finally named. The object that had been hanging over the whole evening like weather. I looked at her. Then around the table. Then at Patricia. No. I said, the new car just made it impossible for you to keep telling yourselves the old story. Nobody said anything. So I continued. For years, you all needed me to stay exactly where you put me. Poor enough to pity, plain enough to dismiss, grateful enough to tolerate you. I leaned back in my chair. Calm. Tonight upset you because I didn't arrive asking for room. I arrived taking up my own. The only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the candles and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Richard looked at the papers again. Then at Mark. Then at Daniel. Something ugly and old seemed to move behind his face. Notre conscience. Calculation. He was doing family math. Liability. Shame. Optics. Even now. Especially now. Patricia was the first to break again. Her voice came out tight. I think this has all become very ugly. I looked at her and felt, for the first time, absolutely nothing that resembled fear. No, I said, ugly was what you did when you thought there would never be a consequence. That was the moment. The actual one. Not when I got out of the car. Not when Alyssa asked her question. Not even when Daniel backed me. This was when the room knew the old arrangement was dead. Because nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. Nobody had a clever phrase left. All those years of polished cruelty. And when it finally met a wall, it had nothing in its pockets. I stood up first. Slowly. Set my napkin beside my plate. Daniel stood a second later. Patricia looked stricken now. Not because she understood pain, but because she recognized loss of control. Where are you going? She asked. Home. I thought, but not just home. Out. Beyond. Past. I said. We're leaving. Richard frowned. In the middle of dinner? Daniel looked at him. Yes. Simple. Final. Mark said. This is a mistake. Daniel picked up the folded packet, then seemed to reconsider and left it on the table. No, he said. The mistake was years long. Alyssa shook her head with a laugh that sounded brittle enough to crack. This is unbelievable. I met her eyes. I'm sure it is. You've never had to imagine a world where I stopped playing along. Patricia stood now too, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Claire, she said. And for the first time in all the years I had known her, my name sounded almost human in her mouth. If something I said ever hurt you, I actually closed my eyes for half a second. Not out of fatigue. Out of recognition. There it was. The coward's apology. Conditionnel. Fougue. Designed to preserve self-image more than heal damage. I opened my eyes again. You don't get to hide in wording now. She went still. I softened my voice. Not for her. For me. For years. You made me feel like love had to be earned through humiliation. I don't live that way anymore. And because this mattered too, I looked at Richard. At some point, silence becomes agreement. He looked away. Then I looked at Daniel. Really looked. There are moments in a marriage when the future does not arrive as romance. It arrives as a decision. A line. A witness. He held my gaze and said, quietly, I'm coming with you. I nodded once. Good. We walked to the entryway together. No one followed right away. Maybe they were stunned. Maybe pride glued them in place. Maybe the house itself, so used to hosting little performances of power, Had no script for what to do when the audience walked out. Patricia finally called after us as Daniel reached for the door. "You're overreacting." He opened it. Cold air spilled inside. Then he turned back and said the sentence I think he had been trying to grow into his entire life. "No, we're just done pretending." Then we left. The cold hit my face and cleared everything. Every room like that always smells smaller once you step out of it. We walked down the path together. No rush. No dramatic storm. Just the clean, hard quiet of a December night. When we reached the car, I saw our reflection in the dark blue paint. Two people under porch light. Tired. Changed. Still standing. Daniel opened my door for me. I got in and shut it gently. He came around to the driver's side, settled behind the wheel, and just sat there for a second with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The house glowed behind us. Perfect from the outside. As always. Then he exhaled. Allons. Rough breath. "I'm so sorry." The words hung between us. I looked at him. This time, I believed he knew what he was apologizing for. Not one dinner. Not one silence. A pattern? A cost. A marriage left unguarded. "I know," I said. He nodded. Eyes wet now. Not crying. Close. "I should have ended that years ago." "Yes," I said. He looked at me. Waiting. That was new too. Not defending. Not negotiating. Waiting. So I told him the truth. "I'm not promising you that tonight fixes everything." He swallowed. "I know. I mean it. I know." I looked out through the windshield. At the wreath on the front door. At the expensive windows. At the place where I had spent years shrinking. "This is not a speech and then normal life," I said. "Things change now." He put the key in the ignition but did not start the car. "What do you need?" There are questions people ask because they want peace, and questions people ask because they are finally willing to pay for repair. That was the second kind. So I answered honestly, "I need boundaries. You do not break because guilt gets loud." He nodded once. "I can do that. I need no more private loyalty and public silence." Another nod. "I can do that too. And I need the truth the first time, even when it's ugly." He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Yes. I believed he meant it. Believing he could live, it would take longer. But meaning matters. It is where rebuilding starts. He started the car. The dashboard lit soft blue. Warm air began to move through the vents. He backed out slowly. And as we pulled away, no one came to the door. Not Patricia. Not Alyssa. Not Richard. No one. That felt right. Some endings deserve an audience. Some deserve emptiness. We drove home in silence for 10 minutes before Daniel said, "You were incredible tonight." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. No, I was overdue. That actually made him smile. A tired one. Real. When we got home, I went inside first and stood in the little living room with the tree lights blinking in the dark. Blue. gold, blue, gold. The apartment smelled faintly like pine, old wood, and the cinnamon candle I had blown out before we left. So ordinary, so safe. Daniel came in behind me and closed the door. Then we just stood there, coats on, shoes still on. The kind of stillness that comes after something leaves your body. Not adrenaline. Wait. He stepped closer. Not too close. Enough to ask without pressure. Can I hug you? I nodded. And when he did, I let myself lean into it. Not because everything was repaired. Because I was tired. Because strength is not the same thing as not needing rest. Because even vindication has a pulse afterward. He held me for a long time. Then I pulled back and looked at our tiny living room. The warped floor, the second-hand couch, the wrapping paper scraps still on the rug, the dishes in the sink, the ordinary evidence of a life built honestly. I said, I used to think I was embarrassed of this. Daniel followed my gaze. You shouldn't be. No, I said, not this. I looked at him. I was embarrassed that I kept begging the wrong people to tell me it was enough. That changed something in me forever. Not that night alone, but that realization. Because there is a particular freedom in understanding that some people will never revise their story about you unless your success threatens theirs. And once you know that, you stop offering them drafts. Over the next few weeks, things unfolded exactly the way truth usually unfolds in families like that. Messily. Indirectly. Patricia called 3 times. The first message sounded offended. The second sounded wounded. The third sounded almost tearful, which would have moved me more if I had not learned how often emotion can be used as public relations. Alyssa sent Daniel a text saying the evening had been deeply inappropriate and that I had weaponized class resentment. I told him to leave it unanswered. He did. Richard called once and asked to talk man to man, apparently forgetting I existed at all in the problem he had helped build. Daniel told him no. Uncle Mark sent one short email through a lawyer a week later regarding the documents and certain mischaracterizations. Daniel forwarded it to someone more qualified than me and did not engage emotionally. That, more than anything, told me he was changing. Not the speeches. The restraint. The refusal to run back into the old machinery and offer his skin. We spent New Year's Eve at my parents' house. My mother made too much food. My father burned the first batch of rolls and blamed capitalist ovens. At midnight, he hugged me in his old wool sweater and whispered, "You look lighter." That nearly undid me. Because he was right. I did. Not happy in some ridiculous, polished way. Not healed all at once. Lighter. As if someone had been standing on my chest for years and had finally stepped off. In late January, Daniel started therapy. That was his decision. Not mine. I told him I was proud of him when he said it out loud. Then I left it there. Because real change cannot survive being parented by the person it hurt. My own life kept moving too. Work expanded. Responsibilities grew. I helped open another location by spring and negotiated my first performance-based compensation structure without apologizing once for the number I asked for. The first time I signed that document, I thought of every holiday dinner where someone had treated my ambition like a costume that did not fit. Then I signed anyway. That was the real revenge. If you want the truth, not the car, not the dinner, not Patricia's face when the room stopped obeying her. Those were moments, important ones, satisfying ones. But the real revenge was this: waking up and not feeling defined by the people who once narrated me. Building a life so steady that their old opinion could not shake the table anymore. Months later, Patricia sent a letter. An actual letter. Cream stationery. Blue ink. Careful handwriting. No doubt chosen for effect. I sat with it unopened on my kitchen table for a full day before deciding whether I wanted her voice in my house. Even through paper. When I finally read it, it was almost what you would expect. Some truth. Some revision. Some sadness. A few lines that came close to accountability, then backed away just before it became expensive. She wrote that she had never meant to make me feel outside the family. That sentence sat in my hands like something breakable and false. Because intent matters. But impact builds the house you actually live in. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and left it in a drawer. Not as a treasure, not as evidence, as a reminder. You do not have to answer every knock just because it learned your name. By summer, Daniel and I were better. Not magically, not perfectly. Better in the way things become better when two people stop confusing peace with avoidance. He told me more. Earlier. Even when it was uncomfortable. I told him when I felt resentment rising before it turned into frost. We learned new habits. Unglamorous ones. Truth before timing. Boundaries before tradition. Repair before performance. That is not romantic movie language. It is stronger than that. It is what keeps a marriage from being eaten alive by other people's access. We did see Patricia and Richard again eventually. Briefly. Public place. Daytime. Neutral ground. No holidays. No house. No audience. Patricia looked older. Not dramatically. Just less lacquered. Richard was quieter. Daniel did most of the talking. That was appropriate. I listened. Watched. And when Patricia said, very softly, "I hope someday we can find a way forward," I answered with the only honest thing I had. A way forward is not the same as a way back. She nodded. And for once, she did not argue. That was enough. Not closure. Enough. Because some stories do not end with everyone hugging in a kitchen while snow falls politely outside. Some end with rules. Distance. A smaller table. A quieter life. And that is not failure. That is wisdom with receipts. So when people ask me now whether I felt victorious that Christmas Eve, I tell them the truth. Not exactly. Victory is too loud a word for what happened. What I felt was something cleaner. I felt released. Released from trying to look respectable to people who fed on comparison. Released from translating obvious cruelty into something easier to survive. Released from the lie that endurance is the highest form of love. It is not. Sometimes love is a boundary. Sometimes peace is a door closing. Sometimes dignity arrives in the shape of a sentence you should have said years earlier. And sometimes the thing that finally silences a room is not the new car in the driveway. It is the woman stepping out of it, knowing she no longer needs permission to belong anywhere. If this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe. And if you have ever had to rebuild quietly while people watched from the sidelines waiting for you to fail, type, "I rebuilt" in the comments. Because some of us did not get easy beginnings. But we still built lives nobody can laugh at now.